The moment my granddaughter Maya's smile didn't reach her eyes, a shiver, cold and precise, traced a path down my spine. I lay in my bed in my Chicago apartment, feeling a weakness that had become my new normal over the past few weeks, a subtle, creeping paralysis that had sapped my energy. The morning sun, a gentle wash of gold through my bedroom window, did little to soothe the growing unease. Maya stood over me, a figure I had always associated with warmth and light, now cloaked in a chilling stillness. She held a syringe, the glass glinting in the pale afternoon light, and told me it was a new vitamin cocktail to help me feel better. The lie was as clear and sterile as the needle itself. It wasn't the fluid inside that terrified me. It was the chilling, clinical look in her eyes, a look I'd never seen on the face of a child I'd raised since she was a little girl. She moved with a practiced ease that was far too confident for a simple home remedy. Her hand, which had so often held mine in comfort, was now steady and precise, devoid of any genuine affection. A faint smell, something vaguely medicinal and sweet, hung in the air, a scent I had come to associate with her daily visits. My heart, already weak from what I thought was old age, began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As she leaned in, her other hand firmly holding my arm, the thin fabric of my nightgown offering no protection, I knew with a dreadful, undeniable certainty that the needle she was about to plunge into my skin was not a cure, but a final, fatal solution to a problem I had no idea I was creating. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Edith Vance, and for 82 years, I've lived a life of quiet dignity, rooted in the simple rhythms of Chicago's Old South Side. My world was built on the tangible, the pages of well-loved books, the scent of fresh bread baking, the worn armchair by the window where I watched the seasons change. For over 40 years, I worked as a public school teacher at Hyde Park High, my days filled with the simple, profound purpose of shaping young minds. Every paycheck was a testament to my dedication, a promise of a better future, and I saved every single penny with a near-religious fervor. My purpose was not to build a life of luxury for myself, but to forge a legacy for the future of my only living kin, my granddaughter, Maya. She was the light of my life, the one I had poured every ounce of my love into after the unthinkable happened, the sudden, tragic passing of my daughter, Maya's mother. Maya, a bright, ambitious girl with a seemingly boundless future, became my sole reason for being, the singular focus of my lifelong devotion. Unbeknownst to her, my life savings, a meticulously managed nest egg of over $1 million, carefully invested over decades, was stashed away in a high-interest account. It was a foundation, a future without struggle, and I had designated it entirely for her medical school tuition. It was a secret, a grand gesture I had planned to unveil on her graduation day, a foundation for a life she wouldn't have to struggle for. But Maya had a different dream, one built on a fragile facade of online perfection. My world was one of tangible sacrifice, while hers was a hollow echo of a life she couldn't afford. She was a med school dropout, a secret she had kept from me for over a year, weighed down by student loans she couldn't repay and a crippling addiction to a life she couldn't afford. Her meticulously curated social media presence was a digital empire of influencer content that showed a life of luxury she was far from living. She was a ghost in my home, constantly on her phone, a device that was both her window to a fake world and her prison. She scrolled through other people's perfect lives and desperately tried to make her own look just as polished, editing photos to erase the cracks in the walls and using filters to disguise the despair in her eyes. She saw my modest home, my quiet life, my simple dresses, and my worn but clean furniture, and mistakenly assumed my savings were a small, insignificant sum, a final barrier between her and the life she felt entitled to. She had been feigning concern over my illness for the past few weeks, a compassionate act that I had mistaken for love. The poison was slow-acting, subtle, and I had simply believed I was getting old. The real sickness wasn't in my body. It was in her heart, a festering rot of greed, desperation, and betrayal. The subtle symptoms had been accumulating for weeks, a slow, insidious march of decline that I had attributed to the natural, unforgiving process of aging. A creeping lethargy had replaced my morning vigor, making the simple act of rising from my bed feel like a monumental task. A persistent, dull ache gnawed at my joints, an invisible vice tightening with each passing day. My mind, once a steel trap for memories and numbers, was now shrouded in a foggy, almost dreamlike confusion that made simple tasks like remembering a phone number or paying a bill feel insurmountable. I would sit in my armchair, staring blankly at the television, the characters on the screen moving and speaking without making any sense to me. Maya had meticulously orchestrated it all, a slow, insidious poisoning that perfectly mimicked the symptoms of old age. She had become my devoted caretaker, a role she played with a chilling, convincing artistry. She would insist on preparing my meals, a gesture I had taken as a sign of her newfound maturity and love. "Grandma, you need more vitamins," she would say, her voice soft and full of what I had believed was genuine concern. She would bring me calming herbal teas at night, their floral aroma a cover for the subtle, medicinal scent I had become accustomed to. All the while, she was lacing them with a low-dose neurotoxin she had synthesized from her forgotten medical studies. She had convinced me it was the start of a mystery illness, and she was my devoted caretaker, my only salvation. Each day, she would check on me, her hand feeling my forehead, her eyes filled with a feigned sadness, all part of a meticulous script. She was not a granddaughter in that moment. She was an actress playing a role in her own twisted drama. Now, as she held the final lethal syringe, the mask of a loving granddaughter slipped entirely, revealing the true, monstrous face beneath. Her face, usually so expressive for her online audience, was a chilling tableau of cold, calculated resolve. The carefully constructed sympathy lines around her eyes were gone, replaced by a steely, detached gaze that held no emotion, no recognition of the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. "Grandma," she said, her voice a detached whisper, as if reciting a line of code. "It's going to be so much better this way. I'll be able to pay off all your old bills, and you'll finally be at peace." The words, meant to be soothing, were a venomous confession. The fluid in the syringe was dark, almost black, and I knew in my heart it wasn't a vitamin. It was a fast-acting neurotoxin she had reserved for this final, desperate act, a remnant of her abandoned medical career. She had calculated everything, from the dosage to the time of day, a macabre ballet choreographed for my demise. As she pushed the plunger, a final, horrifying realization washed over me. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a perversion of my love. The very person I had dedicated my life to, the person for whom I had painstakingly saved a fortune, was now using a part of her expensive, discarded education to end my life for that very same money. Just as Maya was about to plunge the needle into my arm, a loud, insistent knock echoed from the front door. It wasn't a tentative tap, but a firm, rhythmic series of raps that sliced through the sterile silence of the apartment. Her hand froze, the syringe poised just above my skin, the glass glinting with a malevolent light. "Who is that?" she hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper that was both a question and a curse. Her eyes, which had been so cold and resolute a moment ago, now widened with a primal panic. The sound was a discordant note in her perfectly orchestrated symphony of betrayal. It was an intrusion, a foreign element she had not accounted for in her meticulous plan. The knock came again, this time more demanding, and a voice, warm and professional, carried through the heavy oak. "Mrs. Vance? It's Grace, from the visiting nurse service. Your friend, Catherine, was worried about you and scheduled me for a check-in." Maya's face contorted in a silent scream of rage and terror. The perfectly executed plan was unraveling. She hadn't accounted for this, hadn't considered that the simple, genuine love of an old friend could so completely upend her evil machinations. The nurse, Grace, was a complete unknown, a variable she couldn't control. There was no way to poison Grace, no way to stop her from coming in, no way to hide the truth. I had forgotten that my old friend, Catherine, had been concerned about my declining health. She had called me a week ago, her voice thick with worry. "Edith, you don't sound like yourself," she'd said. "I'm calling the visiting nurse service. You need a professional to look after you." It was a casual conversation, a forgotten detail in the fog of my illness, but in this moment, it was a lifeline sent from above. Grace's arrival was so impossibly timed, so divinely perfect, that it felt less like a coincidence and more like a miracle. It was as if a force greater than Maya's greed had intervened, as if a voice had whispered in Catherine's ear, a gentle nudge to make a phone call that would, in the end, save a life. My heart, which had been racing in terror, now beat with a sudden, renewed hope. God had heard my silent prayer, a prayer for a second chance, for a moment to breathe. The knock on the door was not just a sound, it was a divine intervention, a quiet whisper in the chaos, a lifeline extended at the very last moment. The sound of the key turning in the lock was a symphony of salvation. It was the sound of a door being opened, not for an intruder, but for a guardian angel. Maya, panicked, tried to play it off. "It's nothing, Grandma, just someone at the wrong door," she stammered, her voice a thin, shaky veneer of calm that couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. The syringe, still held aloft, trembled violently in her hand, the black liquid inside sloshing back and forth. But the knock came again, louder and more insistent, and Grace's voice carried through the door, now with a note of clear urgency. "Mrs. Vance, I can hear you talking. Are you all right in there? I'm coming in." The sound of the lock turning was a final, deafening chord in the symphony of her failure. Driven by a surge of strength I didn't know I had, a furious last gasp of will against my frail body, I pushed Maya's hand away. The syringe, no longer a weapon but a fragile piece of glass, slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. The sound was a shockingly loud crack, and the glass shattered into a dozen pieces. The thick black liquid, an opaque and sinister puddle, pooled on the pristine white carpet, its purpose now exposed and undeniable. It looked like a stain on the soul of my home. In a desperate, wild attempt to cover her tracks, to wipe away the evidence of her crime, Maya lunged for the broken syringe. Her foot, clumsy with panic, landed squarely in the slick, viscous puddle of poison. She slipped and fell, her body twisting in a frantic, uncoordinated sprawl. A large shard of the broken glass, from the very instrument of her intended crime, plunged deep into her hand. A guttural scream, not of pain, but of sheer, unadulterated shock and fury, tore from her throat. The front door swung open and Grace, a seasoned nurse with an unshakable poise, stood in the doorway. She wasn't just a visitor, she was a force of nature, her calm presence a stark contrast to the chaotic scene before her. Her gaze, swift and professional, immediately took in the tableau of betrayal. The dark liquid on the floor, the broken syringe, Maya's bleeding hand, and my frail, shaking body on the bed. She didn't have to ask questions. With a professional eye, she instantly understood the gravity of the situation. Her training took over, and she recognized the symptoms of the slow-acting poison I had been suffering from, and the chilling, telltale signs of the neurotoxin on the floor. It wasn't a random incident. It was an act of attempted murder. She didn't hesitate. Grace, the nurse whose timely arrival was no accident, immediately called 911, her voice calm and authoritative as she relayed the details to the dispatcher. As the paramedics rushed in, she knelt by Maya's side, her movements precise and practiced, and began to treat her bleeding hand. It was a quiet, professional response to an act of heinous betrayal. The rescue wasn't just for my life. It was a righteous, just action that began the process of righting a terrible wrong. The poison that had been meant for my heart and mind now coursed through Maya's bloodstream. The large, concentrated dose, meant to deliver a swift, final blow, reacted violently in her system. The neurotoxin, which she had so meticulously synthesized to end my life, now began to attack her own nervous system. It was a cruel, beautiful irony, a direct consequence of her actions. The paramedics, alerted by Grace to the nature of the poison, were able to stabilize her, but not before the damage was done. The toxin, a volatile compound she had naively assumed she could control, had triggered a severe, debilitating autoimmune reaction. Her body, in a frantic attempt to fight off the foreign substance, had begun to attack her own nerve cells. It was an internal war, a quiet, cellular battle for which there was no cure. She didn't die. That would have been too simple. Instead, she was rushed to the ICU, a prisoner in a sterile, silent room. The poetic justice was swift and absolute. Within days, she was diagnosed with a rare, incurable condition that caused constant, agonizing nerve pain. The pain was not a dull ache. It was a relentless, electric fire that seared through her body, a constant, burning reminder of her attempted crime. The once fluid dancer of her staged social media world was now a trembling, broken woman, her movements jerky and uncontrolled. To manage the pain and prevent further nerve damage, she was put on a rigorous schedule of daily, painful injections. The very instrument of her planned crime became the central feature of her daily existence. Every morning, a nurse would come and administer a dose of medication, the needle a constant, piercing reminder of the life she tried to take. She was now the one living with needles every day, a prisoner of her own ambition. Her life on social media, her carefully constructed world of perfection, was gone. Her followers, who had only seen the curated, flawless version of her, had no place for this broken, suffering reality. Her digital empire collapsed in a silent, forgotten whimper. Her followers were replaced by the sterile hum of hospital machines, and her carefully curated life was reduced to a cold, unforgiving reality. There would be no escape, no quick fix. She would spend the rest of her days tethered to a system of medical care, an endless, agonizing testament to the grace she had tried to extinguish. She had sought to gain a fortune with minimal effort, but was left with a life of constant, grinding effort just to exist. Her ambition had brought her not riches, but an immeasurable, unending torment. Today, I am not consumed by bitterness or anger. My body is slowly recovering, and the fog has lifted from my mind. The money I had so carefully saved for Maya's future is now a beacon of hope. I did not visit her to gloat, but to tell her I forgave her. My forgiveness was not for her sake. It was a gift to myself, an act of faith that allowed me to find peace again. With the remaining funds, I established the Grace Vance Scholarship, a fund for aspiring nurses at a local college, in honor of the nurse who was sent to save me. The story of my life, and the timely arrival of a stranger, is one of unwavering faith in the face of the darkest betrayal. If you have been betrayed by someone you trusted, remember that your story is not over. You have the power to turn your pain into a platform for hope and healing. Be a beacon of light in your own darkness. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.